Guys, 11 o'clock.
Good morning, everyone. So, welcome to our last lecture of the week. But before starting, we will have Danny doing our initial prayer, and reading, and Raquel doing our initial prayer, and then a lecture from our friend Marco. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Never tire of loving. It is possible that the response to your love does not arrive immediately. The reactions that it generates may surprise you. It is possible that they may be discouraging. It happens that, uncustomized as they are to pure feelings, people react with defense mechanisms. If you keep at it, though, you will be able to demonstrate the excellence of this feeling without limits and will get it back from those you love, receiving the blessing that love is covered with. So, love always.
So let's now close our eyes, elevate our thoughts to our Master Jesus and all the spirits present here today with us. Let's ask them to open our minds and our hearts for the lecture of today, that we may be inspired to understand a little bit better Jesus' teachings. Please inspire our friend Marco, that he may be able to deliver the best to help us all. Thank you, so be it.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so nice to see everyone here today. I'm just gonna put some of my notes here up again so I can see what's going on. Okay, so thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see some friends, that we miss and love so much. And our spiritual friends and our friends over the internet and everyone that came today. Thank you all for coming. This is our kind of our year-end type activity that we do here at TSS before the Christmas break. So I had the pleasure and the honor to be giving this lecture today, which it's a very important time for all of us as we're preparing, right, for this beautiful moment that we have every year. Every time we go around the sun, we mark this the Christmas time. And we can feel that, right, inside our hearts building up during this time of year. And I think we all need to be connected to this beautiful energy, right, that marks our celebration of our Master Jesus incarnating this planet. So what are we going to be talking about today? Today I'm going to base pretty much the entire lecture, the conversation, on this book called Jesus in the Home by Spirito Neo Lucio, psychographed by Chico Xavier. And in a specific chapter of this book, chapter 49, called The Redemptive Journey. And I think Jesus is going to tell us in this passage something that is so important, so close to our hearts, and that I think we can spend a lot of time kind of going through this particular passage on this book, and probably perfect timing, right, this time of year to be talking about redemption, right, and what does that mean, right, to all of us. Okay, so I'm going to be reading some parts, and then we're going to be exploring a little bit more details of each one of those sections. Okay, so the passage starts with a conversation in a group setting. That's typically what happens in Jesus in the Home. This is where Jesus would sit down with with the closest followers at that time, right? And they would ask questions. They would be close together in a small place, having a nice conversation about topics that are really, really important. So he could go delve deeper into some of those specific ideas, right? And in this particular one, the wife of Zebedee, so one of the Marys, right, of the stories that we hear in the so just to mark the presence of the women there, right? So I think that's important, right? Because she's the one asking the question this time. Of course, like we know from the usual translations and recovered manuscripts that are in the Bible today, that obviously there are a lot of males, right, surrounding Jesus at the time, but we tend to forget the fact that it's not only them, right? There's actually a lot more, right, that were following Jesus closely at that time. So she's going to ask a question about the path that it takes us to God. In other words, like how can we move on this journey, right, towards God? Like we're talking about, the narrow door. We're bringing all of that together, right? So how we get there, right? How do we do this, right? So Jesus, listening to that question, is going to start telling a story, right? And I think we're going to spend some time going through this story together today, okay? So he started telling a story that in a valley far, far away, there were a group of Jews that through this familial or genetic, actually he's talking about genetics too, but we're not going to go there. This group of individuals lost their sight, their vision, right? So they couldn't see. And so they were blind from birth, right? So it's something that they were born like that, right? So, and the fact that they've obviously, this group of individuals all started to lose their sight at birth, they started to grow together, and they isolated themselves, and they were living in a cave, like an environment, like a secluded, protected, kind of dark environment all together, right? But then one day, an enlightened brother, as Jesus says, someone, right, would come to them and talk about the beauty of Mount Zion and how it was it to listen to the sermon of Jesus and God at the time, like how beautiful was it, right? How beautiful was it to worship in that scenario? But they couldn't see, right? So this enlightened brother were just trying to describe to them, right, how it feels or looks or what it was, right? So when this enlightened brother was telling them about this, like most of this individuals who were blind actually started to get upset, right, and lamented their perspective to the fact that they can never see that, right? Why are you telling me this story? If I cannot see any of that, right? But then this brother continue explaining to them that there was a way, to see again, right? There was a way to do it. So they shouldn't be lamenting or discouraged, right, of being to that scenario. And then he suggested a few things, like a recipe, right? So here's the recipe, and I'm going to read directly from the book now. So if they abstained from the various lower nature pleasures to which they had grown accustomed into darkness. Now think about this. These are, individuals that lost their sight at birth. They're isolated, right? They're tormented, lamenting the situations. So clearly here they allow themselves to go through this various lower nature pleasures, obviously something related to matter, bodily pleasure type of things, right, that he's talking about. But if they step away from it, they will be able to regain contact with the light and eventually go to Mount Zion exactly how he described it, right? So most of them said, you know what, this is impossible. Like, it's not going to happen, right? I'm blind, and then they continue. Most listeners, right, the people at that time, viewed his suggestions as sarcasm, saying, "Nah, this is the guy talking about," right? He's just saying that if I start to have discipline, improve myself, do things that are more positive, have a complete change of my mindset, I'm going to be seen again. Or in other words, having contact with light. See how powerful this is? Because he's not talking about just seeing things, right? He's talking about a much deeper context of reconnecting to something much bigger than you. We're representing light, which represents God and the connection that we have with God, right? So that's what he's talking about. And then they continue, the people at the time continue, say they asserted that their parents and other ancestors, all of them were blind, right? And that it was impossible for them to regain their eyes. Impossible. They were sure about it, right? There's nothing they can do. One of them, though, right, like a young man, brave, believed in it and said, you know what? I'll try it, right? So we can stop here, right? We can stop here and go through this. There's so much here. So first of all, he's talking about a group of individuals that are blind from birth, right? And they isolate themselves and dwell on that feeling of being punished, right, through being blind. And then so when someone comes to them and offer a solution, they are sure that it's impossible, right? Can't get out of it. Now, think about that in our scenario now. How often do we see that? Think about it. Who are the blind people? Think for a second, right? We have this beautiful full house today, so we can think collectively, bring this energy together, right? So nice to see all these faces coming in. So we're pretty much, when he refers to the blind people, he's pretty much referring to all of us. At some point in time, one topic or another, we are the blind people in a cave, right? And we are the blind people in a cave that are being constantly given chances, right? Through people that come to us, spiritual guides, people like all these different sources of information that come to us and tell us, listen, how about if you do this, you can get out of that situation, right? But we as the blind, or in other words, the ones that are disconnected from the light, right? That's the representation here, will say, no, it is impossible. Can't do that, right? Can't do that. How many times we put ourselves in the position that we are dealing with issues and challenges and all those things, right? We isolate ourselves from this divine energy that flows through our heart all the time. And we stop accepting any offer of help because we're so disconnected that we feel that we're alone, nothing's going to change, it is impossible, we're done, right? That's what happened to the blind people. It's like, you know what? All my ancestors, all my family, everybody's like this, right? So now think about us. How often we look around us and say, oh, there's so many things going on in the world, but everybody is like this. Do you want me to be the different one? Do you want me to be the one that say, hey, don't talk like this to your friend. It's not okay, Don't drink. I remember when I stopped drinking, it was a battle. It sounds crazy, right? But it was a battle because people thought I was sick. Most of my friends was like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. You're not drinking. I'm like, yeah. Why? I don't know. I just don't want to. Do you want to talk? I'm like, yeah, I want to talk. I want to talk about life and, what we're going to do tomorrow. No. What do you want to talk? Like, tell me what's happening with you. I'm like, nothing's happening with me. I just decided that this is not what I want from me anymore. Right? I was the one from that entire group that said, hey, I think that's it. I think I need to move on from this stuff that I know it's not going to help me that much, But it was a battle because I was fighting against the blind, the ancestors, everybody that thought that was totally fine, right? In my group, even my own parents asked me. They actually called me one day and said, I heard that you're not drinking anymore. I'm like, that's correct. Why? I'm like, I don't want. I'm okay without it, right? It's okay, right? tell me, my son. I remember this call. It's like, Mom is here. You can tell me whatever. Like, I don't know what's happening. It's like nothing is happening. I literally just said, that's okay. I don't need this anymore. Right? Obviously, this is something tiny, right? We're not talking about major life changes, right? But now you can think about this yourself in your mind here. How often you're put in a scenario that generations and generations of people are okay doing something, and then you say, hey, it's not okay. We got to move, we got to change, right? And then you're going to be like whacked by society, right? Because, oh, that's weird, right? Why calling people this or that is not okay? Why jokes about sexuality actually not okay? Oh, gee, right? But we've been through that. I've been with the generation that I've seen the change, like we all did, right? This is like, I remember growing up as a kid, this is like a standard, right? We would joke about anything. It was actually the funniest thing in the world for everybody, right? To joke about what people believe or how people dressed up or how people were, or like, what they decided to do with their lives. That was like the standard, right? And now we're like, hey, this is not okay anymore. But you can clearly see that transition required someone, remember, one of the blind guy here we're talking about, to stand up and say, hey, this is not impossible. We actually can do this, right? That is tough. It's not as easy as it sounds. So in the story that we're hearing now, Jesus is telling us about this group of individuals that are blind. They're generationally blind. In other words, they've been all like this together for ancestors and life for many, many times, many years. And then all of a sudden, someone comes to them and say, here's the recipe for you to change and start to connect with light again. Everybody, like, get out of here. Like, this is not going to happen, right? So that's what Jesus did to us. He came. He gave us the recipe. Say, okay, this is the recipe. Love one another. Oh, right? Love one another. That's it. That's the recipe. Like everybody said, out of here. Like it's beautiful to say it, but no one does it. And then eventually, a few people started to realize that, yep, we got to do this, right? But we're still not there yet, right? We're still not there yet, right? Now, what's funny is that there's a passage here that that individual that decided to do the recipe, in other words, they say, you know what, I will get rid of all these vices and things that I'm doing, and I'm going to dedicate myself to something positive to connect to the light again, that one young individual. The other people become like sarcastic and aggressive against him. Does that happen to us? Oh, boy. Like we can go back to my story about drinking. That's exactly what happened. Like every time we go out, oh, that's the guy who's not drinking. Oh, he's a priest now. I'm like, no. Well, though maybe I thought about being a priest at some point, but no. But and then it's saying, and I started to make jokes. And by the way, I was a priest at least 2 or 3 times before I incarnated that I know of. But it's interesting, like that kind of story coming back to life, right? But it's so strong, right? That nowadays it's totally okay for me to ask for a beer that has no alcohol in it. Everybody will be fine with it. Society changed, thank God, right? Because 15 years ago when I stopped drinking, it was not like that, I can tell you. At least not in my family, I can tell you that, right? But that individual, and I'll continue reading now, so he began devoting himself to the required discipline. Who else told us about discipline, discipline, and discipline? We hear this word all the time, right? What does that even mean? What discipline? We use the word all the time, right? So discipline, you can see, it's something we learn in school, like is following some sort of well-defined rules, right? Or sticking to a protocol, right? Or having a method, a pattern that you follow, right? Something, right? It means that you're sticking to some sort of plan, right? That could be applying in science, that could be applying, in this case, in religious context, right? Or moral context. In other words, discipline in this case means connecting at the same time, in the same moment, the knowledge that you have with your actions in a path that is predictable, right? That's your discipline. So you stick to that plan, right? That's what it's referring to. Right? Now, how hard or easy it is to stick to a plan? Think, right? And you can start with basic things, right? Like getting out of the house with your kids in the morning. This is the plan. We're gonna wake up, and in about 30 minutes, everybody's dressed up. And in about 15 minutes, we're gonna eat, right? And then we're gonna leave at about 45 sharp. We're actually gonna get in the car, and 5 to the clock, we're gonna be at school, right? How often does that happen? It's not easy, right? Sticking to a plan is not as easy as it sounds, because the path to get there is quite convoluted sometimes, right? It's not like a straight line that you say, well, this is exactly what's going to happen. But what they're referring to here is the effort that you make to try as much as you can in every moment to maintain the course. In other words, I will get out of the house with the 3 kids in the morning. It happens every day. But every day is slightly different, and it goes through some chaotic moments. But eventually, all of us will get out of the house, one way or the other. Maybe in an ambulance one day. But anyways, we'll get out of the house, right? So that is what they're talking about here, right? And after 4 years of meditation, going back to our character here in the story, hard work, personal obedience to the law, along with fasting, prayer, in his case, that's his tradition, right? We're not judging. That's how they believe things happen, right? He received his sight back, so he was able to reconnect and see it again. Now, we call those in the old text, we call that the miracle, right? Although miracle obviously is not a real thing, right? It means that the effort that was made to change was rewarded with an obvious consequence, which is this case is to reconnect and see again. So it's the same idea. Like, can we be cured? Oh, definitely yes. Do we really deserve it? Mostly not, right? Most of the time, right? So there's always this balance, right, between what we want and what we actually really get, right? In this case, his effort was enough that he actually got the positive constant result, right, of what he wanted to happen. And then he continued. So he almost went out of his mind with joy. Totally understandable, right? In ecstasy, he told his companions about the sublimity of the experiencing, commenting on the spaciousness of the sky, the beauty of the trees. No one believed him. No one cared. They're all blind. To them, the existence is called blindness. They were like, this is impossible. You're just lying. You don't do that, right? Do you remember the early Christians? The stories about the early Christians? So now let's go back and parallel this to like some real world scenarios, right? When early Christians started to pop up all over the world, right? They were actually marked by this interesting fact that they actually didn't care too much about physical suffering or suffering. They're like, this is it, right? They were able to bring so much energy in understanding that suffering of the body is something that is not a big deal because there's like a spiritual component to it. They could see, no one could see, right? So everybody looked at us like, why are these people like, we can actually put them in the cage with the lion and then cut them and put them on fire, and they're praying, they're happy. Like, how is that possible? Right? How is that possible? For them, they could see them, they were connecting to the light because they're finally realizing, the early Christians, that this path that would take me to God can be quite challenging sometimes. And what's important is that who I am as a spirit and who I'm going to be as a spirit and a moral component. So they were like, all of this stuff that's happening around me, right, is not a big deal, right? Because what's important is what was inside of my heart and how I'm going to act and improve this. So see, that's a lot of knowledge for the early Christians, right? Breaking away from a tradition that was the opposite of that. Everything was about matter and things, right? Not about spiritual, right? So they were the ones at that time that reconnected the sight. They could see it. They could see Jesus as who he really was. like a spirit that is like so evolved that just being close to that spirit at that time will be transformational in someone's life. And we have so many examples of that, right? But everybody around them wanted to stone them because like this is crazy. It's impossible. It is impossible for someone to not deny Jesus to the last minute and be killed by it and be happy about it, right? For them, that was impossible. Same as here, the story, someone who's changed themselves to the point that they will be able to see again, for them it was impossible, right? So let's just stone this guy, right? Because this is not okay, right? But now, think about this. So now we have people that, lost sight. Now one of the individuals regained sight. And then we're like, oh, the story's over, right? The story is you do a lot of good things, you're doing a transformation, and you're going to see again. That's it. Have fun. No, right? Because what we don't realize sometimes is that the journey is much longer and complicated than just one single little step that we're talking about here, right? Imagine this individual now stepping out in the universe, right, with the sight, but completely clueless about what the universe is. He's never seen it. He's never experienced it, right? So now he gained the tool. He needs to learn how to use it. We can go back to us now. We're going to do that all the time. So when we're created, we get this thing called free will. Have you heard about this? So free will is interesting, right? It's like you brought as a spirit with this open book, right? Which is like blank. You're going to write it up, right? Yourself. And then at the same time, you also get a chance to decide what to do all the time. But you also, by deciding, you also have to deal with the consequences of it, right? Either good or not so good, right? It's a huge tool. Same as the vision here, right? He got it. Now what he's going to do with it? It's not as easy as it sounds, right? Because our free will is the real tool that we have to actually grow. Because if someone's just telling you what to do all the time and you're just following that, you're not learning. You're just literally following a path. Whenever you have a chance to do it yourself, you're going to mess it up. I can guarantee you that, right? So he continued, said he saw how inexperienced he was. So he exercised the greatest caution until one morning, in order to gather wild honey, he approached a hiding place carved out in the rock, and was held up by a thief who demanded him to hand over his money back. So he was attacked. He's never experienced this. He was in a cave and he was blind. Now he's out in the world and he can see things. He's exploring and learning, right? But since he had no money, he agreed to be enslaved by the malefactor, who for 5 long years kept him working incessantly. Now you think about this, like one of those movies, right, that never end. Like whatever the character is doing is always going to be a problem. Like always something bad happens to the main character, to the point that by the end of the movie, it's like, come on, can just like a little break happens. You're expecting that little turn, right, in the movie, so you start to feel a little bit better, right? Some movies, you don't have that, and you get out, it's like, oh, such a hard movie. So we're always waiting for this, but unfortunately for this character here that we're talking about in the story, that's not happening, right? He had a problem. He stepped out of it, falls into another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. Remember that Jesus is talking about this as this redemptive journey. In other words, this is the journey. They ask, what is the journey to get to Mount Zion? And he's talking about this. In other words, the journey is not like going to this beautiful field of flowers and the wind blowing, like one of those scenes that you see so beautiful. No, the journey is like lots of trials, lots of falls, lots of standing up and moving again. That's the journey. But pay attention to this story. He was enslaved by this guy who attacked him. But he decided actually to be super kind and selfless. And he stayed with this guy in captivity, working without complaining too much. He stayed there. His kindness was such that he converted the guy that was keeping him to be a good guy. And this guy now, which is transformed, released him to keep going. So what are we talking about? It means that every time we're being held at gunpoint, we just have to be super kind and hug and love our enemies kind of thing. No, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is that the moral principles of that individual is so strong that even in the most disadvantageous position and scenario that you can possibly think about, he stuck to the love and kindness that he had inside his heart. By doing that, he was able to change his malefactor, right? That guy that enslaved him. Where else did you hear about this, right? Do you remember the book Paul and Stephen, right? I think most of us heard about this story. Right? So Stephen, in what happened to him was kind of interesting, right? Because at the time that Romans were actually in control, political and control of the region, right? His father Jochebed and his sister, right, were all living together in this piece of land, and his dad obviously got so upset about what was happening, right, of this of the rule of the Romans at that time. He decided to put fire on the farm that is actually by the governor of the Roman Empire at the time. And that went really bad because he put fire on the land and then killed one of the servants of this guy, right? As a punishment, the Roman guy, apprehended all of them, killed his dad, and sent Stephen out to forced labor, right, for life. So a reasonable punishment, right? He had nothing to do with that, right? But enslaved and punished for life. Now, in this scenario, most of us would do what? Revolt, right? Angry, right? This is unfair and all this. That's totally fair and fine, right? Steve was not happy about it, but he said, you know what? Like, what am I going to do, right? So he accepts the situation, goes into the boat, right? But even in that scenario, he's kept in this boat crossing, right, to be punished for life. The captain of the boat and one of the very well-known passengers of the boat falls ill, and he's the only one that actually offers to help and say, you know what, I'll take care of this gentleman, knowing that he was probably going to be dying too because of the contagious nature of the disease, right? And he stays with the guy until the end. So even in that scenario, his love and his kindness to everyone, right, was so strong that he changes the whole scenario and he's freed, right? And that's when Stephen actually is able to escape the boat. And then we know the rest of the story, that he finds the house of the way, he meets with the disciples, and he continues his journey of spreading the word of God. But again, these are scenarios that are similar to the ones we were talking about. They kept their connection to the moral principles, right, to that point. But then we say, oh, okay, that's enough, right? So he was blind. He goes, now he's being capped 5 years. Now he's free again. It happens again, right? So now he continued his journey, and then we when he freed once again, this faithful believer started once more to desire to reach new eras, right? New places. So he started out distributing fraternity and happiness to people, right? To all travelers across his path. But upon reaching a small village where the law was enforced with excessive severity, he was arrested again for unknown reasons, right? As an unknown criminal. Knowing that he would be betrayed by his lack of strength if he tried to escape, he let them lock him up until he could figure it out how to deal with that, right? Nonetheless, he was never inactive in exercising the good. In the very jail that he wanted, although he was innocent, right? He found numerous opportunities to demonstrate goodwill, love, and tolerance. the authorities were so impressed with him that set him free. So, what is actually setting this guy free since the beginning? What does it mean free? What does being free means? Right? We're talking about physical freedom, right? Like free from the jail. But as Stephen's going to tell us in the book Paul and Stephen, we're talking about freedom of following the law of God. That's the real freedom. Be free in a way that's much more impactful than physical freedom. He was always free, even when he was captive, because his heart was so aligned with the divine laws that for him, that's exactly what mattered. So he was never captive. Like Jesus was never hurt by the people who were hurting him. He was not. He was like fulfilling his mission. He was happy about it. Right? He felt sad for us, right? Not understanding what was going on. Just like this individual was kind of sad because of the other people, right? That were not understanding how bad they were acting. And he continued, right? And they released him, right? And then the story continues. His thoughts, he continued his way, right? But only after 20 years of struggle and trial, over which he has always been victorious, he was able to reach Mount Zion in order to worship the Lord. And then the Master Jesus paused and glanced around the room and concluded, "Such is the journey of the heavenly kingdom. Above all, people must realize that they're blind and apply to themselves the remedy prescribed in the divine commandments. Upon attaining understanding, despite the ridicule of all the ignorant people around them, they must press onward, sometimes alone, almost always alone," he says, "from the dark terrestrial valley of the Mount of Divine Light, making use of every opportunity to serve indiscriminately, even their enemies and persecutors. When followers of the good understand their duty to silently mobilize all their resources on the journey without wasting any time on complaining and criticizing, which only indicate a low level of spiritual growth, will then they be able in a position to reach the kingdom in the shortest amount of time possible, because they will continue molding their wings for the divine flight by using self-discipline and unceasing work for the peace and happiness of all." How powerful is that? Now think about this. So what Jesus is saying now, which is like a good summary for all this story, is that, well, we are all blind. We are the blind people of the story, right? Eventually, some of us, right, will start to reconnect to the light. In other words, regain the ability to see, but not see matter, see spiritual world, right? See our path of who we really are. Because we are spirits in a path of growth and evolution. And the path to reaching that, the shortest path possible, is to always, in every scenario, work hard, as it says here, in this not wasting time complaining and criticizing, but use all the energy, the possibilities we have to help one another grow, to be kind, to love, right? To forgive. But when I'm telling this story, when I'm reading this, I always think, and I still think, it's like, it's like you go to a movie that everything goes bad with the main character. Like there's a point you're like, why is like this is so unfair, right? We say this. This is not real, right? I criticize whoever wrote the script. Like, no, this is impossible, right? But the reality is we criticize, or we think it's unfair exactly because all we're seeing is that short part of the story in a very physical way, and not thinking about the end of that story, right? So this is exactly what we're thinking about this individual here. We stuck to the fact that he's being punished and suffered and this and that. But we don't realize that in that single journey, he finished years and years and multiple incarnations of trials that he could have that he avoided, right? By literally keeping that discipline of saying, okay, if the fact is that I have to grow morally and I have to love one another and help everyone indiscriminatively, I got to do it. And he did it. And I can tell you this because I know I'm in this position. When I read the story, I always think like, oh boy, this is so unfair. I do. Right? Because that's my mindset and that's our mindset. And Jesus is so perfect when you say, we spend too much time complaining and criticizing. Right? Now, why we do that? Well, that's probably another lecture that we're going to have. But the reality is, the same way I have a plan in the morning to get out of the house with those 3 kids, beautiful, loving, love them incredibly. But yeah, we get upset sometimes, right? I do. I don't know if you guys have. No, I do a lot, right? And we typically tend to do that when things do not go according to my plan, right? Which is not the real plan in the vast majority of time, right? Now, how can we learn from Spiritism now? In Spiritism, we have so many great examples of the back story of what's happening to certain individuals, right? And we can get André Luiz's collections, for example. They're fantastic to explain that, where we see, for example, spirits that have committed certain acts or done certain things in the past, and they come to this new incarnation and say, the book The Masters, for example, is a great example if you want to read about stories of failed mediums and kind of what happened, what went wrong, and what went right. So we come to this incarnation with a set plan that we don't know, right? But we agree, we actually signed a contract on it, right? So we signed this and say, yeah, I'm going to go back and, oh God, I've done so many things in the past. I want to fix things. I'm going to, do perfectly this time. And for me to do that, I want to come and, I don't know, I'm not going to be able to do this, or I'm going to try not to do that, or I'm going to expose to this. So whatever trial you can imagine, we come up with it. And for example, there are some examples that, are clear about this. So an individual that will come and say, I'm going to come and I'm going to actually lose my arm, right? For, I don't know, reasons, right? I'd say that's the plan, right? But they do so good, right? Instead of losing the arm, they break a finger. And then we're going to do what? This is so unfair. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I broke my finger. Like, thank God. I broke my hand once. And I did exactly that, right? So I'm coming downstairs one day, and, I use my hands all the time. I mean, I'm a dentist, right? So, I mean, you can imagine that's a big thing, but it's not a big thing. But in my mind, I think it's a big thing, right? So everybody supports me. No. So that's what we do, right? Hey, call attention. Look, I have it's like, everybody's like, seriously, come on, right? It's like, like 30 days will be fine. Stop complaining, right? But we try to attract this attention to us, right? So here I go downstairs, I fall down the stairs with my dog, and I try to rescue the dog, hold myself, do all the things at the same time, goes bad, broke my finger, right? And I'm in a waiting room, right? And I'm, waiting to get needles in my hand and all of that. But I'm thinking about this, right? And I'm thinking about, what was the plan? Have you thought about this? This is crazy. This is spiritist stuff, right? So it's like, we're always thinking about, wow, okay, what's happening? It's not even worth it. Don't do that. But, and actually, André Luiz and Kardec tell us, like, stop trying to figure out what's happening. Just do the right thing. Come on, right? Anyway, but I was doing that. So I was like, maybe I was breaking my arm. I don't know. Maybe I was like, I don't know, losing my... I kept this in my mind, right? Trying to understand kind of putting myself into the right perspective, right? Because I could have easily complained the whole entire month that I had that thing in my arm, the cast. I say, I can't do that, or I can't use the microscope, right? I'm like, this is nothing, right? Nothing, right? So that's the type of thing that that the story is also telling us. That's the summary here. So Jesus is saying that, instead of wasting energy, with this, how about you take this and make it even better for others, for you, and for everyone around you, right? So, I like to give examples of things. So I'm going to give you another one. So I remember when our oldest son was diagnosed with epilepsy, right? In the very beginning, I've been through that. Like I wasn't at work, and I remember this days. I was sitting down at my work. All my entire energy for the entire day was like, why is this happening to me? Does everyone think that way? Me too, right? I'm not here because I'm different. I've learned this. No, zero, right? I'm struggling the same way. So we're all in the same boat. Hey. But I remember doing this, and I'm sitting in this computer. I'm doing completely nothing, just literally my mind going completely crazy, trying to figure out why is this happening, right? Why? And then after probably a month of this, right? Me and Joyce, we come together one night and just say, you know what? Here's the deal. If this is happening like this, it's because one, we definitely agreed to this, right? Two, the plan is, and by that time we knew a little bit about spiritism by that time, so we're like, okay, fine. Like, my mentor was like hitting me with a hammer in the head. Like all of a sudden I'm going through the home and I look at a book and I feel this open it. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm gonna open the book. And I open the pages like, stop complaining. I'm like, oh. Yes, my mentor had a lot of work that time. Yeah. Thank you. But there's one day that we actually stop, right? We talk to each other. It's like, we gotta do something about this that is more than just complaining, because this is not going to take us anywhere, guaranteed, right? So that's why we said, you know what? I spent so much time figuring out recipes to keep like a keto diet. So how about I actually do something? Let's say I'm going to take all this keto stuff that I'm doing. I'm going to help other families going through keto too, right? Because we got to do something, right? There has to be a reason that I'm a scientist. I know how to do Excel tables pretty good. And I'm going through this and I'm realizing I'm calculating all this milligrams of stuff like every single day, right? And learning how to cook a pasta that has 0 carbs on it. Go figure it out. So I had to do that every day. It's like, I got to do something with it. So we actually contacted the hospital. I contacted the nutritionist. Like, do you have other families going through this? Give my number to them. Let me talk to them. And I actually contacted a bunch of families that way and helped them going through that time, which was actually very hard, right? It's actually not that easy as it sounds. So at least in that tiny little moment, even if it was like one family that I really helped, I did it, right? So I felt really good about it. Could I have done more? Probably, right? So probably I had a plan in my incarnatory plan that was going to help like 2,000 families. I helped one, but anyways, I take that one, right? Because it's better than 0. Maybe when I come next time, I don't know, I'll do 3, right? But this is exactly what the story is about. But we're stuck in the fact that, he's being punished and this, and he's a slave and happy about it. How is that possible? It is possible because he's free. This character is really free. Doesn't matter what circumstance he's at. If he's locked up or he's being punished physically, he's already free. Just like Jesus is free, just like the early Christians were freed, right? When they were enduring the punishment of their faith and being totally peace with it, right? That's real freedom, right? So you can see that the journey to Mount Zion, meaning in this case, the journey to your spiritual evolution, requires you to stick to the plan, and the plan is the divine laws. That's the plan. So the closer we are aligned to that divine law, the easier and the more straightforward is the road, independently of what kind of shake us or try to move us out of the trials or expiations, right? And and I continued on, and then going back to that epilepsy. So we went through that part where I was helping all the families, and we met some other families where it was really, really important for them and for us too, because that's a two-way road. It's like we had this little group that we were able to share experiences about going through it. And then, I really like running and cycling a lot. I know that's part of my therapy, I guess. But, I said, you know what? I know how to, I can run and I can ride a bike. So maybe let's try to do that and connect things together. So we created this thing called the Epilepsy Ride. It's me, Daniel, and a friend of ours who also has a son that also has epilepsy, and he also rides a bike. Coincidence? I don't know. Anyway, this is like God. It's like, okay, finally, right? It's like, so I went to the Epilepsy South Central Ontario one day in downtown Mississauga, and then I told to the guys, listen, guys, I don't know what to do. The only thing I know I can do, it's like I can ride a bike the whole day, like nonstop. Maybe we can do that and help people with epilepsy at the same time. How about that? Sounds like a good idea. The guys were totally, it's like, yeah, sure, that's perfect. Let's do that. So we did it. So we rode 300 kilometers nonstop from like 5 in the morning to 6 at night. And Daniel rode like 50K with us. And we were able to raise $15,000 for epilepsy, right? And we're doing it again next year and hopefully more. And there's more people coming. So again, I turned that very challenging situation into now like a program that's helping kids in the summer go through epilepsy, right? So I had an option. I had an option of continuing my office, doing nothing, right? Like totally wasting my energy trying to figure out why God is punishing me, right? And believe me, I thought that. I'm not saying here that, well, yeah, I told us like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna be no, that's a struggle. I actually spent ages just fighting with God, right? In my mind, right? Until one day I realized that was not going to take me anywhere. I had to make a turn, right? And that was the turn. Just like for this individual, he was blind for generations, living in a place that everybody thought that was the real existence. There's no way anyone could see anything ever. And he said, no, I can't do that. I'm going to turn and I'm going to do it differently. And he did, right? So we all have those little turns or chances, opportunities, right? And they usually come through some pain sometimes, right? It doesn't come always through, graces and beautiful and good. Sometimes do. Just it can happen anytime, but in many cases, we're challenged by the trials, right? And those are the moments where we really have our faith challenged to the point that we need to make a decision, right? And we need to fight through whatever is happening with that connection or the light that Jesus is talking about that connects us to God, right? That love, right? That energy that connects us to God. Not always easy, but this is our road. We can't run away from it, right? This is the road, right? So the more discipline you have, the more effort you put to go through every moment, no matter how challenged they are, with that connection to God strong enough that you know what to do, good job. Actually, we're doing the right thing, right? Although not easy sometimes. Okay. So that's the redemptive journey, what we're going to talk about today. And if you want to read this book, I highly recommend Jesus in the Home. We have a copy over there. You can buy it online too. This is chapter 49, Spirit Neo Lucio. And every chapter is a different story. We don't have it anymore. I see little shaky heads like this. Okay, so forget everything I said. Online, you can just find it on Amazon. It's fine. Or Kindle, right? I don't know if you like Kindle or something electronic, right? But I highly recommend it because every chapter summarizes a topic, right, through a story, which I really like to tell stories. So thank you very much, everyone. And we're going to thank you. So we're going to have some questions now, also from the internet. If there's any questions, no, anything's fine. Any comments, questions, suggestions, criticisms, complaints? I don't know, like anything.
You're not supposed to complain.
No, that's right. That's why I'm bringing it up because it's it's time. If you want to go back to it, we can do it. So do it together.
I
Yes.
just mentioned 2 points just because it happened this week.
Yeah.
And Denise introduced us
Yeah.
to the radio soap operas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this became a hit at home.
There you go.
So every lunchtime we
Yeah.
had lunchtime together.
Yeah.
And we listen a couple of soap operas. And we are just started one yesterday, 2 days ago actually, about Chico Xavier.
Uh-huh.
And it's a 5 episodes and start talking about cases from
Yeah.
Chico. And one of them they highlight his childhood
Mhm.
and how his godmother
Mhm.
stick forks on his belly,
Mhm.
and he always going outside to pray and talk to his mother.
Yeah.
And his mother always say, "Come on, Chico, this is not that bad. Why you are complaining?"
Yeah.
He was bleeding.
Yeah.
And he's like, I got by surprised. It's like even a mother
Yeah.
introducing a 6, 7 years old kid to say, do not complain.
Yeah.
Just keep going. It's gonna heal.
Yeah.
It's like I got impressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the second point with Chico as well is like every time I read his books or about Emmanuel,
Mhm.
Emmanuel sounds very, to my perception,
Mhm.
okay, sounds very straight,
Yeah.
very rushed. Why you are crying, Chico? Why you
Yeah.
are complaining, Chico?
Yeah.
It's like it's a common theme.
Yeah.
Even with Chico Xavier, that
For sure.
probably is far better than me.
Yeah.
Right? It's just for us to pay attention that it's
Yeah.
like if he's in this position,
Yeah.
receiving this message,
Yes.
he should
Yeah.
be for that.
Yeah. But it's interesting you bring that up because that's always proportional too, right? Because of course, the reason that they're being so like straightforward with him because also they know that he knows and he can deal with it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's an obvious thing. Like they're just bringing back something that spirit already knows for a fact, right? Because we do that same thing too. If I'm dealing with a spirit or a kid that has certain capacity of understanding, and I got an older kid which has a different capacity of understanding, I talk to them in different ways, right? So it's also a good learning from that perspective too, because the reason why that's happening to Chico, obviously, one, he knows what's going on, right? He has the background to understand it, right? They can talk straight to him and say, you know what? Yeah, stop complaining. You know this stuff. Like, move on, right? I feel like the same way that I'm talking to my 3-year-old and my 11-year-old, right? My 3-year-old is typically like this, like a very convoluted conversation about no one understanding anything until we got to the end. And with my 11-year-old now, I can say, hey, buddy, come on, like this is move on, right? And then he's like, oh yeah, I'll move on, right? So that's a good example too. But you're right, like. If it happens to Chico, like, what about us, right? So that's a very good point. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned when you were talking
Yeah.
how the world is like a mess right now. We heard a lot of problems, and
Yeah.
I do therapy, and I tell
Right.
problems from my family to my
Yes.
therapist. Like,
Yes.
It's not your problem.
Yeah.
And let's try to focus on you.
Mhm.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And how sometimes you have to learn how to say no
Yeah.
to some people and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it is a struggle as you were saying. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you think that it's my mission or it's my discipline
Yeah.
yeah. to be charitable or
Yes.
to be
Yeah.
trying to help
Yeah.
others all the time.
Yeah.
How to balance that?
That's a great question. I mean, everybody got that, right? So one thing that we learned very early in not only in spiritism but in psychological evolution and kid like physical evolution of kids, like how we evolve and grow, and adults too, is that we always do something that is within our capacity. In other words, there's a balance between what can we do or can we offer, right? So growing that steady concept that the fact that there are certain things that I can and I should do, but there are other things that I cannot right? That's very important in the beginning, because if you start to try to do things that actually you're not prepared to do, that will create that type of imbalance that makes us, like harder for us to cope, right? So our cope mechanism will be very severely affected by it, right? So sometimes I'll give you an example. When I say that, we have to do the best in every scenario, sometimes it means just not thinking badly about someone. That tiny little thing is already a huge step. Because I'll give you an example. How often it could be like something in your family or something on the TV, whatever. We see something or hear something, and we almost immediately turn into our mind into a judgment, punishment path, right? Say, I see that, I judge that, that's wrong. And you start to send this darts, right? Mental darts, right? To people around you, right? I would say that is probably one of the first steps. In other words, you don't need to do there and physically change the life of another person. You can't, because they have their free will. They'll make things that are not okay. And there's sometimes not a law we can do, although there are things happening, but you're not actually physically doing that part, right? But the fact that we actually can learn how to manage our own sentiments, our own thoughts, our own energy towards others, that's already like a ginormous step in that right direction, right? So in other words, what you do, it's proportional to what you can do at that particular time and moment, right? The same way you can't ask for a 3-year-old that's throwing a tantrum on the ground and say, stop it, right? It's not gonna happen, right? Shake the person, like, get out of there, right? Zero. There's zero connection. There's zero capacity of that brain to understand anything you're saying. Like it doesn't matter, right? But right after that scenario, when you get that same 3-year-old, which is now calm and quiet, right? Reestablish that connection. Say, hey, what do you feel like? Establish then you can do wonders, right? But you see the two different. We're adults are the same, right? When we're in a scenario that we're ready or capacity to do things, yeah, you should do that. But if you're not, start by actually looking in your own thoughts sometimes and just tiny little things, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right. The balance is there in any situation, right? Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna say bye to my friends over the internet. Thank you all for joining us. And what? And I can move out? Oh, thank you.
Get out.
Sorry. So thank you for everyone that joined us on the internet, and hope to see you next year with us. And we will get prepared to our passes here.